Hey everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Heading North podcast. This week I am joined by Sarah Pohl from Zenith Adventures. How are you, Sarah?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good, and my name's Nick. As always, I'm the host. And this week we're going to talk heavily about paddleboarding, which is why Sarah's back on for the second time. You guys might remember her from the North Shore with Sarah Pohl from Free Air Life Co. She's also from Free Air Life Co. So check them out. But today we're going to talk heavily about paddleboarding, and Sarah, I think, is probably the best person I know to talk to specifically about paddleboarding.
Oh, thanks, Nick.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Zenith before we get started? That way everyone knows kind of why that ties into paddleboarding as a whole.
Yeah, so Zenith Adventure used to be the Vista Fleet gift shop. Vista Fleet owns excursion boats that go in the harbor and on Lake Superior to tour around the area. And the owners travel out west and kind of all over in the summertime in their RV with their kids. And big things that they do a lot of are adventure companies and just kind of one-stop shops for places they can book excursions and doing things in the outdoors. And we felt that we were missing a actual location, a building for that in Duluth, Minnesota. And so we opened Zenith Adventure as a rebrand from the gift shop in 2020. And so this is our second year. And the first adventure that we picked up and brought on was paddleboarding because that was one of my biggest passions. So that's how we started with paddleboarding.
Nice. Yeah, there's so we've got the sunrise, and just as a full disclaimer, I also am now a guide with Zenith as well. So when I say we, that's why. We have the sunrise paddles where we go out into the canal and all that fun stuff. And then also we have the river paddles, which goes up the St. Louis River. So there's a lot of really cool options. I mean, paddleboarding's fun in general, but to kind of be able to show up and have a fleet of inflatable boards available to you and all your personal flotation devices, all that stuff kind of provided is definitely a really fun way to enjoy paddling.
Yeah, absolutely. And just getting out for the sunrise, a lot of people think it's hard to wake up that early, but when you have that group mentality and you have a time to and people to show up for, it's just so worth it.
Yeah, I when you invited us to go out, and unfortunately we didn't get a sunrise because of all the fog, but it was one of those things like, this is early, but at the same point, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
So, to be setting up paddle boards at 4 o'clock in the morning and getting ready to go. I think guests have to show up at 4:30 though, correct?
Yeah. Yep. So
Yeah.
now the sun is rising later, so now we're showing up at 5 and getting on the water by 5:30, but in July, that's the earliest point that the sun is rising around here. So, yep, we have to meet up at 4:30 in July.
Yeah, it's not like it's 2 in the morning. So if you guys are thinking about it, waking up at 4:30, being there by 5, or waking up at 4 and being there by 5 for August is definitely a good option. If you guys go over to Zenith Adventures Instagram, you'll see all the posts from the sunrise paddle, and I mean, you really can't explain via word how beautiful it is. So I would just definitely recommend checking out some of those photos because it's all inspiring to see the sunrise and people paddling with all those awesome paddle north boards.
Yeah, I've traveled a lot of places and I still think that Duluth has one of the best places for sunrise. So,
I believe that. So why don't we kind of dive a little bit more into you and just how you got started paddleboarding?
yeah. So, I actually bought my first paddleboard in 2019 and so not that long ago, to be honest. And it was my kind of pre-pandemic purchase. I was looking to get into kind of a new adventure, a new sport, and I'm not a very competitive, intense person, and so paddleboarding felt perfect to me. I had kayaked before and whatnot, but I'm a smaller frame person, and just the idea of trying to get a kayak or a canoe on my own car to go places and travel with it was really intimidating. And so a paddleboard for me was the most portable, adventurous option to be on the water. And that's why I ended up going that route. And then I just fell in love with it and I got hooked and I haven't stopped since.
Yeah, paddling is a little bit of an addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so addicting. I want to be out there paddling now until the lake completely freezes over and then I'm off.
That's I've been stuck at home unfortunately, but I've been absolutely itching just to get out on a lake or a river and just do a little bit of it, even if it's like a half hour of paddling. But I am itching for it myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just and it's fine when you find those places where you don't have to commit to a long paddle. And that's kind of what I've looked for over the last couple of years. I have places and locations that I like to go when I want to commit to a 2 hour paddle. But I do also have locations where if I have, a half hour to an hour, I can also do that too.
That's Wild Rice Lake for me, up outside of Hermantown.
Beautiful.
That's just it's a small lake. Wind doesn't really affect it a whole lot, and you can kind of get out and back in 20, 25 minutes and still enjoy it.
Yep, yep. For me, that's Hartley Pond. I live in Rice Lake, and so Hartley Pond is like, I don't know, maybe 2 miles tops away from me. And you do have to walk there a little bit, but it's not far, and it's just small and it's protected. And actually, the sunsets are really beautiful there. So
So as we're explaining all of these locations, I want to let the listeners know, just remember we are in northern Minnesota, so we've got 11,000 something lakes available to us. So when we're talking about our local watering hole or spot to go, that's kind of what I've learned in my now year and 3 months of being in Minnesota is just common conversation. What lake you go to is kind of how people know who you are.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's not many places that have 10,000 lakes plus and rivers, so you should almost automatically know where we are when we start throwing out 100 names of lakes.
Yeah, and then we also have the Big Lake. So when you hear that, that means Lake Superior for us here. So if you hear Big Lake today, which I'm sure will come up, that's what we're talking about. But it's funny you talking about how you kind of got into this as your pre-COVID activity. I was semi-similar. So during the main part of the pandemic, we were stuck in Connecticut, couldn't really go out anywhere. It was almost frowned upon even to get out into natural areas where you're away from everyone. So it took me a little while, but pretty much the second I moved to Duluth, so we're now on 16 months ago, I think the first purchase I made was a new rugby mouth guard and then a paddleboard. And I was a surfer my entire life, skater, all that fun stuff. So boards weren't really adverse to idea to me. And then I've also paddle surf, but paddleboarding was really nice. Where you're saying it's like you were saying, it's not necessarily competitive or rushed. It's just like that sport where you can get out and just relax and kind of take in the environment, take in the water around you, and still be in the water. So
Yeah.
I was very similar that I got it, and that's become kind of my main focus since.
Yeah, and I'm similar to you in that way because snowboarding, I've been snowboarding for gosh, over 20 years and that was kind of the next sport that I could relate to because I didn't see it as too much different, being on a board, I'm not strapped to it. Like I can probably figure this out. I've always loved water, so water doesn't intimidate me. And maybe that's why the big lake doesn't intimidate me. I am really smart about when I go out and where I go out, but I think that's just what the draw I had to it was. And, during the pandemic when that hit, you're right. Like for a little while, it was even frowned upon to be out there. I still went out there, honestly, because nobody could keep me from being out there. But it was just kind of the one thing that I could always fall back on. I was at home with my kids over the pandemic, and, tensions run high when you're in a small space. We have a really small house together all the time. And paddleboarding was my release and my way of just kind of getting just time to put my thoughts together and take a minute for me. And yeah, I loved it. And sunrise was the best because nobody was ever out there at that time of day. So that's kind of where I got hooked on the sunrise paddles.
I started running very early in the morning. It was the same reason that I could get out on the trails or out on the lake walk and not have to worry about 100 people passing me. So that kind of is a natural progression, I guess, for sunrise paddling. So was sunrise paddling your idea with Zenith, or was that kind of like the first thing that they wanted to do? How did that go?
Yeah, so sunrise paddling was definitely one of my ideas. We were trying to think of, we've obviously do hiking and whatnot too, which is an original idea, or, people do hiking. But a sunrise paddle, the idea of getting people out there as the sun was rising was something that I've always wanted to provide for this community because a lot of times I've done any kind of sunrise tour, it's actually like after the sun rises. And for me, my favorite part of sunrise is when it's actually like rising or right before the sun actually gets, in the sky and before it lifts above the horizon. And so for me, my favorite part of it was always getting missed on any tours I had ever done before. And I just thought, if we're in the best place for sunrise and watching the sunrise, we have to get people out there before it actually happens. So, I mean, we had to figure out a way to make that happen. And I was also paddling the canal and the harbor and whatnot which a lot of people, weren't really sure how to do and they weren't really comfortable doing it. And I thought, we can do this with a group as long as we do it in a safe way. And as long as we put a lot of time into training and learning about the area and the boat movements and their schedules and whatnot. And so that's what we did. And it was just something that I was super passionate about learning and giving that experience to people.
That's one thing that I really enjoyed about the Sunrise paddle that you invited us on. It was, you're in that chaotic open water, quote unquote, but it was very controlled. We knew when the charters were coming out. The bridge talked to us a few times to let us know what was happening as far as getting in and out of the canal, stuff like that, which we didn't get a chance to. I'm sure, as I get back into guiding, I'll have plenty of opportunities to do that as well. But I think the thing that I liked the most about it is that it was very controlled and relaxed, and that even though yes we are paying attention to ourselves and our paddling, we didn't have to worry about all the little things of going out onto the lake by ourselves. It was the two of you, the guides, had it controlled, and we could just paddle and kind of take in the areas and be guided whichever way you guys needed us to go. And it definitely made for a lot more of a relaxing trip in the morning.
Yeah, especially for that area. That area is just such a smart area to go with a group that knows the area well. That's not a group or an area that I would ever recommend to somebody that doesn't really know what's happening there. Just because, I mean, there is so much shipping action and boating action, and we really have to yield to them. So it's really important that you know what's happening and just kind of what to expect, or even what the unexpected could be in that area for your safety. So that's why we started doing the tours there.
Nice, nice. So as we're getting into the meat and bones of this episode, I want to kind of start talking about paddle boards a little bit more specifically. So really where I want to dive in is we have a lot of options for paddle boards. You have solid boards, inflatable boards, a lot of different brands. I'm curious as to what I think I already know your favorite as far as paddle or inflatable or solid board. But favorite brand, favorite type of board, anything that you kind of want to let the listeners know about, like, paddle boards themselves.
Yeah, so for me specifically, again, like I said, when I looked into paddle boards originally, it was for my frame and what board could I get that could take me as many places as possible. That was all I cared about. It wasn't about performance, specifically. It wasn't about speed. It was about where can I take a board anywhere I want to go in the world, not even just in Duluth, Minnesota, because I wanted to travel with it. I wanted to bring it different cities, states, countries even. And so I have a Paddle North Portager, which is an inflatable board. And that's my personal favorite for inflatable, mostly because, when you look at these boards on Amazon and whatnot that are, $300 or more, those boards are just plastic. That's all they are. They're, you're inflating plastic basically. And so, I mean, yeah, they're affordable for the people. And I think it's a great option for people that's the only way they're going to be able to get out there. But for me, the Portager was the best option because of the weight. It's really lightweight, and when you inflate it and then you pack it in its backpack for traveling, it inflates and it packs really compact. So that was important to me because if I wanted to go from lake to trail to next lake, I needed it to be able to be small enough for me to be able to carry it and travel with it. And I needed it to be durable. And so the Portager actually has like woven fibers on the inside of it. So that way it doesn't puncture like a lot of just the plastic, kind of cheaper boards do. So it's really built to be durable, lightweight, which is really what I was looking for when I was looking to purchase a paddleboard.
I have noticed the same thing. So I have a FitWave board that is what I purchased. It was at the time like $600 down. I think now it's down to $299 on Amazon, which is a great price and it's a great board. It is that polyvinyl material, but it's heavy, and when you roll it up into the backpack, I've noticed as time has gone on, it's not rolling as compact. And when I went and set up a couple of the Paddle North boards that we have at Zenith, and have had some experience with some other people's boards, I noticed one, like you said, the durability of it. I'm never worried that it's, the plastic is cracking or that any of the materials are cracking.
Yeah.
And it inflates super fast. One of the hardest parts of inflating for anyone who hasn't done so is once you've got the board full of air, now you need to get pressure, so that PSI. I've
Yeah.
learned that it's a lot easier, and the board itself expands to allow you to do it a lot easier with the Paddle North boards, but
Yeah.
also it seems to be about 10 minutes faster in my pump.
Yeah.
And I'm an in shape guy. I have enough upper body strength to really kind of push and go. But I've never, well, I haven't bit the bullet on a car inflator yet, so I've always done the pumping, and the Paddle North board's immensely easier than most that I've used.
Yeah, and to bring that up too, when I bought that board, I looked for the shape of it too. That's another thing that people should consider when they're buying a board. So a lot of paddle boards, especially the ones you see on Amazon, you see kind of a U shape with the nose of the board, and the Paddle North Portager has a V shape. And a lot of times you have a paddle board that has that V shape. It's basically going to help you cut through the waves instead of nose diving into the waves. So it also helps your board ride a lot better. But when you think about that and you consider it when you're inflating the board too, I mean, that's a lot less room to have to pump PSI up when you have a V versus a U, right? I mean, that U has a much more air in it than a V shape does. So you're also cutting your time of even having to inflate, and you're performing better with that shape of a board. So that was also something that I considered when I got that board, and I definitely see the difference too, because I do have an Isle and my Pioneer is huge. It's a U shape. It's so heavy. It's like a floating dock compared to my Portager. And it's great if I'm just kind of, maybe if I'm going to be doing like some yoga paddling or something, which by the way, I never do. But if I were to pick that up, it'd be a great board for that. But my Portager is just great for, speed and just for stability and the weight and just everything about it. I love. It's the most versatile board in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and for those of you who haven't used a paddleboard in the past, the difference between the V shape and that U nose, that rounded nose, is very similar to surfing. So when you see a longboard, those easy cruisers where the whole point is for the nose and the back to kind of keep the board up as you're curving down the line, it does the same thing with a paddleboard. So the whole point of that rounded tip is that yes, it does keep your nose above water, but it makes things a lot bouncier when you're going. The board I have in my truck right now is that rounded nose, and you'll get what's called board slap, where when you get any wake from any boats, if you're out on the lake or if you're in the ocean or on one of the big lakes and you're getting those waves, the board will literally slap the top of the water because it's got so much surface area that it doesn't really cut, like you were saying. So
Yeah.
if you get those more V-shaped boards, something like more like a short board, you see any of like the Red Bull pros or any of the other pro surfers riding on those bigger waves, what that does is it literally allows you to cut, and it's a lot less surface area to make that slap happen. So when you're on a calm lake and you get a little bit of wind or you get a little bit of a wake from any boats, it's going to give you more stability so that you don't have the opportunity to fall off.
Yeah, and so I do love the Portager, but you're right. I definitely noticed the difference between my Portager and then we also have hardboard loons that are by Paddle North. And the loons, the water just goes right over the board. It sits way closer to the water. So if people ever ask, am I going to get wet? It's like, yeah, probably. You're on a lake and you're on a hardboard. The hardboard sits a lot closer to the water, but you don't feel as much of every single movement that the lake makes on the hardboard versus the inflatable. So inflatable, yeah, you're kind of riding those waves. You can feel everything. Everything's going over the board too, but it's a lot bumpier of a ride than the loon is.
Well, and I think that also is too the difference between the hard boards and the inflatable boards. I've noticed the hard boards you tend to be a lot wider,
Yeah.
where you are getting a little bit more of that longboard feel. So that's I think where you get a lot of that stability. Whereas like the Voyager, the Portager, any of those options where they are, yes, they're thicker because they are inflated, but they're a little bit, or not even a little bit, I'd say about a half a foot thinner.
Yeah.
So your stability on that, I guess the Y-axis becomes a little bit more intense, a little bit harder to control. So that is definitely something to keep in mind if you are starting out. Maybe go with a wider board, but I'd still recommend having that V-shaped nose.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if you're a super tall, heavier person, I mean, that might be a better option for you too. A lot of those boards that are hard boards or they're wider or they're longer, they hold weight better too. So there's just so many things to consider about your personal frame and kind of what you're looking to do with it when you're looking to buy a paddleboard.
That's something that I have to take into consideration a lot. I'm 6'2" and average right around 200 pounds. So like I've got a lot of weight and I'm top heavy. And I've noticed like Zach and I, one of the other guides at Zenith, went out on a test run up the St. Louis River, and we decided we were going to race upstream against the rapids. And I realized, yes, I'm experienced enough and have the balance training, I guess I would call it, just from years of being in specifically waterboard sports, to be able to keep myself stable. But I can definitely feel a difference based off of my height than Zach, who's a couple inches shorter than me, even right around the same weight. on my ability to keep stability on that y-axis. And so it's definitely something to take into effect based off your body size. If you are bigger, I would recommend a wider board.
Yeah.
Just hands down, get a wider board. I know even like the body glove boards that have that V-shaped nose, they are a little bit wider. My girlfriend Megan has one of those, and I don't seem to have as much of that teeter-totter when it
Yeah.
comes to paddling.
I agree. And it definitely helps for somebody that's new too. A lot of people get too intimidated to do paddleboarding when they're just afraid to fall off or, am I going to be able to stand on it? And I think that if you get something that you're comfortable with, it's always at least good to start there. And then if you want to go into a different board at any time, you can too, once you get more confident.
Well, it's the same thing with surfing. You don't start on a 7'6" board. You start on a 12-foot cruiser and then work your way down. I mean, shoot, I still rarely go below a 9-foot board just because of my size. So it's the same concept. It's all waterboard sports. You just gotta go big and then work your way down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, skating logic too. You start with those 8-inch wide boards and then you start working your way down 7.75. Granted, the kids nowadays are using all these big wide boards again, but each his own, I guess. You can't
It's
can't teach the new generations old tricks.
with snowboarding. I used to love riding a shorter board, and now that I have been doing paddleboarding for so long, now I actually like riding a bigger board. So it's kind of funny how that's also affected my snowboarding too.
That's too funny. So we've got an understanding of what boards are now. I'm kind of curious. This is a little bit for me, a little bit for the listeners. Give me some favorite spots, some areas, even if it's not in northern Minnesota, that you would recommend people go paddle.
Yeah, well, I'll say this one just because I was actually just talking to a friend about this morning. She's planning a trip out to Montana, and I said, my biggest regret when I went out to Montana last is that I did not paddle Flathead Lake. Flathead Lake out in Montana is absolutely gorgeous. It's actually at the top of my bucket list to go back out there and paddle that lake.
Okay.
So if we're talking out west, I would say the Flathead Lake, and then in the this area, the North Shore where we are, I mean, it depends. I mean, Duluth, Minnesota, my favorite's the Lake Superior. You're not going to get that anywhere else, let's be honest. I actually love how just it changes from day to day with what the conditions are. And that's one of my favorite things is just how challenging it is. So I absolutely love Lake Superior. That's my favorite. But of course, I'm going to say Lake St. Louis River because we do tours over there. It's just an absolutely gorgeous area that a lot of people are putting a lot of love into. And there's so much history on the St. Louis River. So, and it just all levels can paddle that river too. So that would be one of my favorite rivers. Baptism River is, a little smaller of an area that you can paddle, but that's a gorgeous area too because you can launch right from the park. Cloquet River is gorgeous. I absolutely love the Cloquet River. Same thing. There's sections of it. You're going to get your rapidy sections, but there's sections that are absolutely gorgeous to paddle there. And then if you're going to go up the North Shore, I would say there's a trail up there that's called White Sky Rock, and there's a lake that's right off of White Sky Rock, and that's Lake Agnes. And Lake Agnes is beautiful too. And of course, I've got a couple of my spots that, to respect the people that live there, I will not give away because they're kind of ones that are a little bit more hidden and just gyms I can't share yet. But I mean, those are my big favorite ones to share just because they're absolutely beautiful areas. So.
I was running into the same issue where I was trying to come up with a few for myself to add in, and I'm like, that one's good, but I can't talk about that yet.
I mean,
That one's good, but I don't know if they want me to let people know that people can go in there.
but I'll give you the fun hint that if you do your work and you do your research, you will find them too. All you have to do is be willing to put the time in to finding them, which is actually, in my opinion, one of the most exciting parts. So I'm not saying it to be rude. I'm just doing it out of respect for the people that live there, that I know they don't want that area to boom and grow like some of these other areas have for paddling. So
Exactly.
also,
I did find. Oh, go ahead.
well, and also because some of them are in an area where I would hate to send a new beginner there and them not know like the weather patterns there and whatnot. I mean, some of these areas can be a little bit more dangerous for a newer paddler too. So maybe if you've been into paddling for a while and you're ready for something more challenging, then you can reach out to me.
So I wanted to add a couple in just to continue this conversation along. One of my favorite spots so far has actually been in the Long Island Sound. So that's right on the East Coast coming into New England. You've got Long Island that comes from the tip of New York City and goes all the way up to Rhode Island. And what that does is it creates a natural barrier where you're not getting as much of that Atlantic Ocean tides and currents, but you're getting its own centralized area where it's a little bit more protected from the larger waves. So if you get out on a calm day, yes, you will still have to traverse over some waves to get out far enough where you're not really getting rocked. But you'll get some really awesome views. There's a few really neat islands. There's one that Katharine Hepburn actually donated. It's a bird sanctuary, has an old mansion on it that's literally just open and available for birds to fly in and out of now. You can't physically go on the island, but it's really neat to paddle past. And then there's a few other really cool inlets there. It's also nice because you can't really get lost. As long as you know the coastline's on your right or left, you're going the right direction,
Those are the
and you can stop at any boat launch. So I think that's why it's one of my favorites for new beginners, especially on the East Coast, is that you can kind of get off anywhere.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and then there's so many places up the shore. I mean, you could do Black Beach, all the popular beaches that are up there because they're easy spots to launch. Sugarloaf Cove is one of my favorite spots. Beautiful protected little cove there that you can launch from, and if you're willing to hike your board in a little bit. And I mean, yeah, there's just so many areas up there that are stunning and so great to paddle. So yeah, that sounds like a wonderful area. I'm actually going to go paddleboarding in Portugal at the end of September.
Oh, amazing.
Try that because one of my most favorite experiences was paddling in Kona on the Big Island, and we had dolphins like swimming underneath our paddle boards. And that was just one of the coolest things to do is be, you're connecting with the board, you're connecting with the water, but to see these live animals swimming underneath you and all around you was just the coolest thing.
That is epic. When we were in Tulum, my biggest hunt was to find a paddle or surfboard.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, resorts didn't offer either. But I got a chance to go free diving on one of the days out on the reef just outside of our resort area there. And the wildlife you get in areas like that is just something that you really wouldn't believe until you go.
Yeah, especially when you're from a freshwater area.
Yep, yep. Yeah, that's been the hardest part for me is coming into freshwater and understanding like the buoyancy difference. Salt water is very buoyant water, and then you come into fresh, and all of a sudden you realize you sink a lot faster. Yep. So now with kind of looping back to Zenith, um, we have a pretty big fleet that's available to people. Do you want to talk a little bit about what options people have if they start paddling with Zenith?
Yeah, oh my gosh. So we have a huge fleet. We have two paddle ships. Paddle ships can fit 8 people on board. So right now we're just renting the paddle ships because they're not quite something we would want to take out in the harbor or the river if we have new paddlers, but they're great for rentals if you've got, like a bachelor or bachelorette party or something that you want to just get 8 people on board and have a good time. So the paddle ship's a really neat paddleboard that we have. And then we have 8 hardboards of the loons that I was talking about that ride a little closer to the water. They're great for a new paddler. They're great to hold a decent amount of weight. And then we have 10 to 12 because I have 2 of them that I've kind of been keeping from our fleet. So I'll just say 12 portagers of our inflatable boards. So we have quite a few boards. And then we have 8 kayaks. So we have 4 double tandem kayaks, and then we have 2 single kayaks. And our kayaks are inflatable too. They're also by Paddle North. Those are incredible again for just how you can transport them so easy. So that's our fleet right now, and that's kind of where we've grown to. And we use them for rentals, touring, and when we first started, we were retailing too. But Paddle North has grown really fast, and they're just for us to be able to order and get the equipment in our season is such a short window that we laid off of retailing this year and just focused only on our tours and our rentals this year.
Nice. And now, just because you book with Zenith doesn't mean you can't bring your own board, correct?
No, so this year we aren't doing bring your own board, but I'm thinking that's something that we will do in the future. We're working on something that will be more available to the local people that live in Duluth or around Duluth, so that they can join our tours too. But we just didn't do that this year, just especially with the harbor being, a area that's a little bit more dangerous. We decided to only have people using our equipment because we knew that means that we could control the quality of what people were using for what type of an area that is. Now for the river, if we had a full tour, all of our equipment was booked and somebody wanted to bring their own board, I'd be more open to that. So it kind of just depends on the area that we're paddling and what they're bringing. So yeah, we do the rentals, tours, and retail will hopefully come back soon. We have so many amazing paddleboarding companies in Minnesota. We'd love to bring even more companies that are local on too, along with Paddle North. So stay tuned for that, because I've got a couple brands in mind that I really love, and I'm hoping we can bring in a little bit of their product too.
Awesome. Awesome. And if anyone's looking to book, I think it's zenithadventures.com.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, hop on there. There's a lot of really good deals that they put out throughout the summer, and just, even if you just want to go for a hike while you're up here, it's a great opportunity to not have to worry about all the little things or the planning ahead. You can just go and enjoy the hike or go and enjoy the paddle. So definitely check that out. So I'm curious now, just to kind of get back to the personal side of things. So I was hoping that you would have a best and also worst experience paddling.
Oh, this is so good. Okay, well, I would say my best experience paddling was in Kona, Hawaii. It was absolutely with the dolphins. I mean, you just can't top that. Maybe Portugal will, I don't know. But right now, either paddling with the dolphins or the moonlight paddle is always at the top of my list, because there's nobody ever out there. And there's just something so like vulnerable about being on the lake in pitch black underneath moonlight. Like the light is guiding you, but you really have to trust your instincts and trust your knowledge of what you're doing and where you are when you're paddling at that late at night. And so my worst experience paddling was absolutely when I was a brand new paddler. I had probably only been paddling for probably like 3 or 4 months at that time. And I decided to paddle one of the sea caves up the North Shore. And in this area in particularly, I launched around like 11 a.m. and I probably paddled out there until maybe 1 or 2 p.m., which if you ask me now, I'd say is a horrible time to go paddling, because that's usually when the wind is at the highest point of the day and whatnot. But this is what I'm saying. A lot of new paddlers do not know this kind of thing when it comes to what you should be looking for and what you should know about when you're, going on Lake Superior. And so I got actually caught in a very strong, gusty, breezy afternoon, and I ended up paddling out by Tetagooch. I ended up paddling out there in a really strong wind with all my might and all my effort, and I was basically paddling just in one spot for like 2 hours straight. It was terrible. And then I wasn't worried, but I was exhausted. And then finally the wind died down and I was able to get back to the point where I had launched. But that was probably one of my worst experiences. And I wouldn't say worst, I would just say humbling. It was the most humbling experience I've ever had with paddling. And from that point forward is what really sparked my interest of really learning about the wind and learning about what to look for. And just everything that I know now was all based off of that experience that I had, because it was so humbling that, wow, I really need to learn more if I'm going to do this again. So
And that's the thing, like as a new paddler, go out and enjoy and have those lessons, but also do a little bit of research and look. I ran into the same thing where I was going out after work and I'm like, I just keep getting caught in wind and this sucks. And even though I know to paddle against the wind on my way out, that way it carries me back in, that could change. So
yeah.
I've also learned morning tends to be the best. One of my favorite experiences paddling was in the morning. We were going up the North Shore. We're just going to do kind of tandem jump between hikes and paddles all the way up to Grand Marais. And we stopped in Beaver Bay. There was just a random boat launch there, and we went, and it was glass. The water itself was just this clear, nice, smooth glass. There was no wind. And that was right around 8 o'clock in the morning. And that was when I started really looking at the weather and saying, okay, there's a difference here. And I've
Mm-hmm.
learned that if you get that early morning or later at night, kind of coming in before the sunset, you will get a little bit less wind, a little bit more calmer waters.
Yeah, I mean, that's a typical pattern. Every once in a while, you're obviously going to get those strong northeast winds, or you're going to get the winds that are just brutal all day. But thanks to knowing where to look and kind of what places to check, I mean, you can avoid that now. And yeah, most of the time it is calmer in the morning and, right before sunset. And it just happens to be the most beautiful. So, I mean, I think that's why it's my favorite time of day to paddle. And also because there's nobody usually out there that early or that late. And so I love when I'm happy to share the water, but I love when I get it all to myself too.
I agree. And if anyone's looking for information on wind and stuff like that, Wind Finder is a really good app to kind of tell you what's going on. If you are on either the Atlantic or Pacific coastline, you can also use the NOAA weather app, and it will give you wind direction, wind speed, and wind gust speed, because that sustained wind speed is not the same as what the potential gust can be as well. So it'll give you some information. That way you can know if you are going out at a good time or if you're going to run into some issues while you're out on the water.
Yeah, one of my favorite apps that I love to use is Windy because you can actually like zoom in on the very specific area that you'll be launching from or paddling. And I mean, you can, look and see what they're predicting, a couple days in advance. Obviously that always changes, but it's been pretty accurate so far. And you can also see the gusts. So yeah, your standing wind might be 6 mile an hour northeast wind. Your gust might be a 30, and there's a big difference between having a 6 mile an hour wind and a 30 mile an hour wind. And so it's just so nice to have information and accurate places to rely on for that, just for your safety. So
I agree, and I think that's one of the great parts about having excursion companies and adventure companies that will also guide you is that you might see, all right, there's a southeastern wind coming in on the lake. I should be fine. It's only 6 miles an hour. Whereas, someone like you or I who has a little bit more experience with the big lake, you're going to say, okay, well, that's also the exact wind that I'm looking for as a surfer to get some waves. So that might not be the best time for us to go out. And it kind of speaks to why it's nice to spend a little bit of cash to have an adventure company come take you if you are newer or even an experienced person looking to get into a new area.
yeah, I just think the guides alone are worth it. I mean, not only do they have just amazing personalities and it's fun to connect with new people that, are love to do what you like to do, which hopefully is, being on the water or a new adventure, but you're also investing in this person to give you an experience where you're not going to have to worry about the lack of knowledge that you have about where you are or where you're paddling or the equipment you're using. And I think every penny is worth hiring a guide for that reason.
100%. So I'm curious. I haven't had much opportunity to do it, but have you gotten out on the water with some snacks, any like lunch or anything like that, where you paddle out and enjoy a meal?
I mean, so far, if I've ever paddled out with food, it's been more of a, kind of little options. Like I usually do things that won't melt, right? So I'll do like trail mix, those not laughing cow, the Baybel cheeses that are in those little rounds. I love those because they don't get gross right away. These are things I like to hike with too, honestly. So these are things that I hike with and I paddle with. And then I like doing the cherries because cherries don't get gross as a fruit either. Like a strawberry or a blueberry would get kind of gross and mushy if it got warm. Like cherries stay really great. So those are my three top, and they're kind of the perfect mix. And then maybe some pretzels too. Those are my like four favorites to have if I'm out paddling. If it's going to be a long paddle or anything like that. But they're also my favorites for hiking too. So, and then
Okay.
also
Yeah.
bar or something little like that just in case.
Nice. Yeah, I've been playing with the idea of going out and doing some type of like lunch on the water or coffee on the water type thing. Maybe
Yeah.
an investment in a paddle ship would be good for something like that. Just paddle out on a giant inflatable dock and
Oh.
moor down for a little while. But there's a girl on Instagram who's also from Minnesota. I think it's Girl of 10,000 Lakes is her Instagram handle.
Yeah.
And she does a lot where she'll bring a cooler out, have some beers, have like a charcuterie or any type of lunch like that. So it's really been piquing my interest to do that. I think the logistics of having a calm enough day for a long enough amount of time is going to be rough to be able to do, but I think it'd be a fun experience to have.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we've done paddles. I've done paddles before that have gone not specifically with our tours, just personally, but I've done tours or I mean experiences where I've been out there for 3, 4 hours more than that even. And yeah, I mean, you got to eat when you've been out there that long and you've been paddling hard enough. And so, and always, I mean, beer is always a great option to have out there as long as you're gonna pack it in, pack it out, because it is amazing at how much trash I find in the lake. And so, yeah, it's a really cool option as long as we're making sure that everybody's respecting, the environment when they do it too.
hmm Yep, that's I think the biggest thing when it comes to paddling that I've noticed too is there's a lot of trash in the water.
Yeah, I mean, it's really been a growing problem, especially along Park Point over the last couple of years. Park Point is a really basically huge long sandbar in Duluth. And It has been terrible the last couple years. And so, I mean, I'm just thinking if we can help like spread the knowledge of, if you're bringing something on your board, you're also bringing it home with you. No different than on land, then hopefully that can help the problem eventually, because, and even if you have a trash bin at your launching point and that trash bin is overflowing, you probably shouldn't use it, because if you get a windy day, all of that trash is blowing all over the parks and it's definitely ending up in the water. So I try to tell people, if you're doing it, just making sure you're putting it in like your dry bag or whatever to bring home is really important too.
Yep, that's one of the biggest issues that was always on the East Coast is all year you think it's fine. People throw trash, but the tides tend to bring it out. And then August hits and it's hurricane season. You get a couple good storms, you get a tropical storm, and all of a sudden you go out to the beaches, you go out to any rivers that have that mouth into the sound there, and there's just trash everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where most waterways are so large that you don't realize the issue until you do have a storm like that, or you're in fresh water and you can look directly down and see everyone's beer cans from the past 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So, Sarah, why don't you let everyone know where we can find you on social media and where we can check out Zenith, and then we'll start closing things up.
Yeah, so my personal handle, because I do a lot of paddling myself, is at Sarah Grassi, and I have an H in my name. And then our business, Zenith Adventure, our handle for our Instagram is at Zenith Adventure MN, just like the abbreviation for Minnesota. So at Zenith Adventure MN. And then our Facebook page is also facebook.com/Zenith Adventure MN as well. So yeah, come check us out. Come follow our adventures and join us for one.
Absolutely. And you could end up with me or Sarah if you book an adventure. So definitely come say hey. We look forward to it. That's kind of the fun part about being a guide.
Yeah, the merrier. We always love having people on the water and just getting people out there for the first time or the 100th time. It's always a blast. So
Awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on today.
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. It's always a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll have you back again soon. We'll probably have another paddleboard episode in the near future.
Until sure.
And everyone else, thank you so much for listening in. If you liked anything you heard in this episode, make sure you head over to headingnorthpodcast.com. Make sure you check out the new blog as well as our shop where you can pick up awesome clothes like our BWCA shirt or any of our hats or other merchandise there. Quite a few, including this BWCA shirt that I'm wearing today. All proceeds go to those organizations to make sure that we are giving back to the environment. Boundary Waters canoeing area is one that I'm really focusing on, as well as the Superior Hiking Trail this year. So if you guys do pick up either of those shirts, like I said, 100% of those proceeds go to those companies or go to those organizations to make sure that we can help preserve those areas and keep them for generations to come. Other than that, if you want to check out Heading North on social media, just search at Heading North Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, as well as TikTok, or Heading North Pod on Twitter. Other than that, guys, thank you so much. And make sure you rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.